We continue now at the top of Daf Tzadi Tesamad Aleph from Meseches Babba Kamma. This is Babba Kamma Daf 99a. And the previous Amar Ravasi said that Uman Kona B'Shvach Kli. Let's say an Uman is given raw materials like wood, and he makes that wood into some kind of a vessel, then he damages the vessel. He only has to pay for damage to the actual wood. He doesn't have to pay for damage to the vessel. The vessel is not considered to be under the authority of the original owner. Rather, he is Kona that improvement. It's considered to be under his possession, and he's not responsible for the damage to the vessel per se. And the Gemara is now trying to bring a proof from a Mishnah. This is a Mishnah later on. The Mishnah says if a person gives wool to somebody who's going to dye the wool, v'igdicho yora, and then he puts it in the cauldron, he ends up burning the wool, he ruins the wool. So it says in the Mishnah, no sin lo demeit smaro. He has to pay him the value of the wool. And so the Gemara infers, demeit smaro in, demeit smaro v'shivcho lo. He has to pay him the value for the wool, but he does not have to pay the value for the wool and the improvement. And so the Gemara says, lav she'igdicho la'achar nafila. Isn't the case over here that it burned after it fell into the cauldron, meaning to say, after the dye already took hold, there was already an improvement, and that's the point in time where there was damage. The ika shivcha, there was improvement. Ushmamina uman kona b'shvach kli, and we see from this Mishnah that the uman does acquire the improvement of the vessel. That's why he doesn't have to pay for the improved wool, he only has to pay for the raw material. This seems to be a proof to what Ravasi said. And the Gemara says, Amar Shmuel says, Hacha b'mayaskin, and here what is the case? Kegon sheikdichu b'shas nefila. The case is that it burns at the moment that it's thrown in. To leko shivcha, there was no improvement. And the Gemara says, according to Shmuel's interpretation of the Mishnah, aval hikdichu la'achar nefila, but according to Shmuel, and again in his interpretation of the Mishnah, let's say it would burn after the dye already took hold. So what would be the halacha then? It sounds like Shmuel is saying, no sin lo demeit smaro v'shivcho. It says that he would have to pay him. Shmuel would say he has to pay him for the wool and the improvement, and that would sound like Shmuel is actually arguing with Ravasi. And so the Gemara says, lema Shmuel lesle de Ravasi. Should we say that Shmuel does not hold of Ravasi? And the Gemara says, not necessarily. Amar lach Shmuel. Shmuel can say to you that the Mishnah is not necessarily going against Ravasi either. And here what is the case? The case might be that the wool and the actual dye belongs to the original owner, and the person doing the dyeing is just taking payment for the work that he is doing. And in that situation, you would not say that the uman gets the shvach kli, because there even the other material, the dye, is coming from the balabayas. But the Gemara then still says it doesn't make sense. If so, if that's what that Mishnah was saying, so no sin lo demeit smaro v'samonin mi boile. So at least the Mishnah should say he has to pay him for the wool and the dye, because now the person is providing not only the wool, he's providing the dye as well. It doesn't say that. It only says to pay for the wool. And so now we're back to our question. If Shmuel's offering this alternative explanation of the Mishnah, that would mean Shmuel disagrees with Ravasi. And so finally the Gemara says, Ela Shmuel dechuye kamar chile. It could be Shmuel is just pushing off the proof. He's not saying this is how to interpret the Mishnah. He's saying you could interpret the Mishnah against Ravasi, but Shmuel himself is not offering an opinion and is not saying against Ravasi. And the Gemara continues, Tashma, coming here a proof from the following Braisa, Hanosein taliso le'uman. If somebody gives his talis to a craftsman, Gomro v'hodio, if he finishes doing the work on it and he lets the person know that he's finished, Afilo mikan v'yad asara yomim, even from now until 10 days from now, Eino over all of mishum lo solin. There's no violation of lo solin if the person doesn't pay immediately. The idea of lo solin is you have to pay a worker right away that day. Here it's been 10 days, but he never actually gave him the finished product, so there is no lo solin. However, Nasana lo b'chatzi hayom, let's say he gives him the talis back halfway through the day, so then Kevon shashak olav achama, since he received the talis back, once the sun sets, over olav mishum bal tolen, so then he has transgressed bal tolen, because he did not pay the uman right away. And so the Gemara now brings its proof. If you think like Ravasi, that an uman is kona, the improvement of the vessel, so in this case he improved the talis and he becomes the owner, so amai over mishum bal tolen, why does he transgress because of bal tolen? And the Gemara is essentially asking, if the uman actually acquires the talis and then he gives the talis to the original owner and the owner pays him, the owner is essentially buying the talis from the uman. It's not really paying a person for the work he's doing, it's actually paying for the item, and there should be no bal tolen in that case. So it must be the fact that there is bal tolen, it must be the uman does not acquire the shvach kli, he's not considered the owner, and he's actually being paid for the work, and then there is a violation of bal tolen if he's not paid on time. And the Gemara says, Amar of Mori Bereder of Kahana, of Mori Bereder of Kahana says, Begarda de Sarvala, we're talking here about a thick garment, and he's giving it to him to launder the garment, so there is no shvach kli in this case. That's why it's possible that there is bal tolen, de leka shivcha, there is no shvach, and that's why there's bal tolen. It's not a proof against Ravasi. But the Gemara says sof, but still at the end, L'mayu havanehile, why did he give him this garment? L'rakucha, he gave it him to soften it. The idea is that he treads upon it while it's in the water, and that softens the garment. But kevan derache hainu shifcha, but when he softens it, isn't that an improvement? There is an improvement. So what kind of answer is this? And the Gemara says, lo, no, tzrich, it's necessary, the agre levitche bitcha, that he hired him to kick it, to pound against it over and over again, b'moas, and every time he's going to hit it, he gets one moas. So he's literally getting paid for the work in this situation. Dahainu schiris, that's a very particular case of schiris getting paid for the actual labor, and that's why there's baltolin in this case. And the Gemara continues, but according to what we originally thought, the lo agre levitche, that he did not hire him in order to beat the garment, in order to soften the garment with this qualification. Again, we understood that we were talking about a typical case of shevach. So Messiah Leila Rav Sheshes. So then this case would actually be a support in general for what Rav Sheshes said. Debo minei Rav Sheshes, because they asked Rav Sheshes a general question. Kablonis, if you have a situation of kablonis is when you're hired not to do a certain amount of labor for a certain amount of time. Rather, what you're hired for is a particular job. It's not a situation of getting paid by the time. You're getting paid for completing the job. So they asked a general question to Rav Sheshes, when you have a kablonis over olav mishum baltolin, over, is there a violation of baltolin in that case? Or is there no baltolin? Maybe there's no baltolin if you're paid for a specific job. V'yamar lu Rav Sheshes, and Rav Sheshes said to them, over, yes, a person does transgress if he doesn't pay on time by a kablonis. And so therefore, in our original conception of this brisa, it certainly was a kablonis. There was a specific job to do. And yet we were saying in this brisa, baltolin, it does seem to be a support for what Rav Sheshes said if you interpreted the brisa in that fashion. And the Gemara continues, well, lema de Rav Sheshes pliga de Rav Asi. Should we then say that Rav Sheshes argues on Rav Asi? And the idea of the Gemara is because if Rav Sheshes says kablonus, there is an idea of baltolin by kablonus, doesn't that already imply that an uman is not kona the shevach kli? Because in most cases of kablonus, you're improving the particular vessel. If you've improved that particular vessel and you kona it, then when the person pays you, he's essentially buying the vessel from you, but that would not be baltolin. The fact that Rav Sheshes said there is baltolin by kablonus, if we're assuming there's a shevach kli in that situation, apparently the uman does not acquire the vessel in that case. And the Gemara says not necessarily. It's possible to have a kablonis without having any shevach in a particular kli, and it could be that's all Rav Sheshes meant. Amar Shmuel Baracha says, B'shlicha digarta, for example, it could be that the kablonis is to deliver a letter. So if the kablonis is a specific job that doesn't involve any improvement of a vessel, so then Rav Sheshes was saying there's a possibility of baltolin. It could be Rav Sheshes wasn't even getting into a situation where there's shevach. Maybe Rav Sheshes would agree with Rav Asi, that is, if there's a shevach kli and the uman is kona, that improvement of the vessel, then maybe Rav Sheshes would agree that there's no baltolin. And the Gemara continues, Lema ketanoi, let us suggest that this is a machlokas tanoim, whether an uman is kona in the shvach kli or not. The Brisa says, Aseli shirayim nizamin v'tabos, if a woman says to a man, she gives the raw materials to the man and she says, make for me bracelet, make for me an earring, make for me rings out of this raw material, v'kadish lach, and if you make that for me, that will be considered that you're giving me something for kiddushin, and I will be mikudeshes to you, it will be a kiddushin. So kevan shason mikudeshes. According to Rabbi Meir, when he makes those items, that is going to be the Kiddushin. It will be an effective Kiddushin at that point in time. Divrei Rabbi Meir, that's the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say, Eina Mekudeshes, ad sheyagia mammon liyada. She's not Mekudeshes until the money actually reaches her hand. Presumably, at first glance, that means until the actual items come to her. So then at that point in time, it's a Kiddushin according to the Chachamim. But the Gemara wants to clarify, what does the Brisa mean? My mammon, what money is the Chacham talking about? Ilema oso mammon, if it really means that money, meaning the actual jewelry gets to her and then it's a kiddushin. Mechlal Rabbi Meir savar oso mammon lo. That would imply that according to Rabbi Meir, she doesn't even need to receive the actual items and it's a kiddushin. How does that make sense? Ela b'may mekadesh. If that's the case, what is he being mekadesh her with? She's receiving nothing if we're not talking about her receiving the actual jewelry. So elapshita, rather, isn't it obvious? My mammon acher. Obviously, the Chachamim are saying it's not a good kiddushin until she gets other money. Apparently, it's not just good enough to receive the jewelry, according to the Chachamim. And Rabbi Meir is the one saying that it's good enough for her just to receive the jewelry. And the Gemara now explains, V'savrua, right now we think that everybody in this brisa agrees that when a person is hired to do something, as he's doing the work, he is owed the money. So when he begins the work, he's owed a little money, he's owed a pruta. Then as he continues the work, he continues to be owed more and more money. And essentially, it's like a loan that she now owes him for doing the work. Udekuli alma, and furthermore, everybody agrees, hamakadesh b'milva eina mikudeshes. If somebody tries to be makadesh a woman with a loan, that's not a good kiddushin. Meaning, if a man is owed money by a woman, and he says to her, I'm going to forgive the loan to you, and that will be the kiddushin, that would not be a good kiddushin. That everybody agrees to. So what's the machlokas? My lav is it not? But uman kona b'shvach kli kamiflagi. They're arguing whether a craftsman owns the item that he's working on. So in this case, he's creating this jewelry out of the raw material. Does he become the owner of that jewelry? The Rabbi Meir savar uman kona b'shvach kli. Rabbi Meir holds the craftsman actually acquires the vessels. When he gives it to her, he's giving her items that belong to him. The jewelry belongs to him. He's now giving it to her. That's why it's a good kiddushin. For Rabbanan savri, and the Rabbanan hold ein uman kona b'shvach kli. The uman does not acquire the improvement of the vessels, and therefore when he's giving her the jewelry, he's actually just giving her her own items, and that's why you need maman achar, you need some other kind of money to create the kiddushin. And the Gemara says, no, not necessarily. It's not necessarily that they're arguing about uman kona b'shvach kli. It could be dekuli alma ein uman kona b'shvach kli. It could be everybody agrees the uman does not acquire the improvement of the vessel. Elohacha b'yeshna l'schiros mitchila v'yatsof kamiflagi. Maybe here they're arguing whether when a person is hired, is he constantly owed the money as he does the work, or maybe we say that it's only at the very end, at that last moment, that he suddenly owed the money. Rabbi Meir holds ein l'schiros el levasof, that when a person's hired, so that money is owed at the very end. So that if he gives the items to her at the very end and says, you don't have to pay me, he actually is giving her something, and that's considered a kedushin. For Rabbanan savri, yesh l'schiras mitchila v'yatzov. But the Rabbanan hold no, when a person's hired to do something, it actually is a loan because he's owed the money as he does the work, and therefore you can't be mekadesh with a loan. That's why it's not a good kedushin. V'ibay same, if you want, I could say another explanation. Everybody agrees that it really is a loan. A person is hired and gets paid as the work is done. And here the machlokas is a person able to be mekadesh with a loan? Maybe it is possible to be mekadesh with a loan. Rabbi Meir savar hamekadesh b'milva mekudeshes. Rabbi Meir holds one who's mekadesh with a loan, it is a good kiddushin. Rabbanan savri hamekadesh b'milva eina mekudeshes. The Rabbanan hold if one is mekadesh with a loan, it is not a good kiddushin. And we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tes Amud Beis.